So, just let me start by giving you a little background about myself. My name is Emmanuel John. I am an IT consultant. I live in Belgium, which is in the heart of the European Union, as you know.
in NATO.
And we're feeling a little bit of the heat that's coming from the tensions that we have in NATO, between NATO and Russia, of course, and you being an expert on these issues, I would like to get to know some things, your perspective about different topics, and so I just wanted to um, have a small introduction, of course, to my audience. To start with, welcome to my show. My name is Emmanuel, and today I have Ted Postol. And Ted, maybe you can give us a small introduction. Of course, I know who you are, but perhaps a small introduction of yourself, please.
Well, I guess I'm uh, a member, emeritus member of the MIT faculty. My area of research has mostly been focused on technologies that have implications for national security, mostly in the military area, which means that I've been heavily involved in questions of nuclear weapons effects and policies. I've also been deeply engaged in questions related to missile defense systems, which have been a big area of activity in the nuclear area, in nuclear policy.
Right.
And I've done work on a wide variety of issues, like some of the issues associated with the chemical attacks in Syria that occurred in Damascus in 2013 and shortly thereafter. And
Correct.
so I've basically been involved in a bunch of issues. Many of them are unfortunately considered controversial. I'm not so sure they should be, since I think the facts are there for people to see if they are interested in understanding them. But in any case, I have sometimes upset people with things I've said. So,
Yes, yes. It seems, and of course, the famous one is where you criticized the capability of the so-called Patriot missile defense system. And I saw the file you shared me. Indeed, there were a lot of misses in the first Gulf War. And how do you rate the system now? I mean, it's been active in Ukraine, of course. It's been shooting down a lot of Russian weapons. At least that's what the Ukrainians claim. How has the system evolved over the years?
well, I think the Patriot system is like many of the more modern air defenses, very capable against airplanes.
Right.
Airplanes must be thought of as as an absolutely different kind of target than a ballistic missile. And if you want to get a sense of what the capabilities of the current Patriot are, I actually have a very interesting video I can show you right now,
Sure.
where I'll show you an engagement of what is almost certainly Patriots in Tel Aviv. And we see two Patriots basically completely miss an incoming ballistic missile fired by the Houthis. Um, the um, the second part of that video will be a an engagement that looks exactly the same, essentially exactly the same, from 30 years ago in 1991. So first I'll show you those and I'll show you that it failed exactly the same way, and then we can talk a little bit about why.
Okay.
So if it's okay, what I can do is let's see. I
Ah, I see it. Yes, I
you
see it
see it.
now. Great. Thank you.
You got.
Awesome.
I don't know how recording has started. Oh no, that's you, of course.
Yeah, yeah,
So you
that's
can
me.
see the video.
Yes, I can see
33
it.
years of missile defense intercepts. Is it
Correct.
is it covering your screen or should I make it larger?
No, this is fine.
Okay, so let me start it and we'll see. You'll see a sequence in real time and then slow motion down to 30% of the time. Let's just start there.
Okay.
And this is this you can see the missile passes two Patriots and they both explode in the sky, and then you can see an explosion on the ground. Now you're
Correct.
seeing the same thing. Uh, the
In slow
missile's
motion.
coming in. It moves past the Patriot. The Patriot then explodes. The other Patriot is not even aligned with it, and it explodes. So that's from December 20th, 2024. So that's literally 10 days ago. Now, if we now if we what we're seeing is an engagement that occurred in January 1991, and you see there are two Patriots rising up. You'll see them; they burn out, and then we'll see a missile coming in, and there's an explosion. An explosion. Both of the missiles missed the target. So
All right.
exactly the same situation that we saw 30 years later. If I have a slow motion of it, I don't know if you could, I can't see on my screen the incoming Scud, but can you on
I can
yours?
see it.
You
I
can
can
see
see
it.
it.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And you can see that the Patriots explode after the Scud missile passes. There's a second Patriot exploding, and we see the warhead then go onto the ground.
Yeah.
This is the same thing, but what I've done is I've fiddled with the contrast and brightness to make things stand out. So this is a very distorted brightness and contrast, but here's what's happening. You can see it. It's
Uh,
miss, go on. Looks, we'll see evidence of what might have been something breaking off the piece of the missile. And then if
mm,
we try to focus on that, it's possible that the second Patriot fused on that piece of debris, but it missed the actual warhead. And then we see the warhead go onto the ground. So this is exactly the same behavior that we see 1991, so 33 years apart. And a question that one might ask is, how can this be? Why did it did both engagements behave essentially the same way? But they both essentially failed the same way. And I think the answer is uh, rather simple. Um, incoming Scud, but can you on
I can
yours?
see it.
You
I
can
can
see
see
it.
it.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And can see that the Patriots explode after the Scud missile passes. There's a second Patriot exploding, and we see the warhead then go onto the ground.
Yeah.
This is the same thing, but what I've done is I've fiddled with the contrast and brightness to make things stand out. So this is a very distorted brightness and contrast, but here's what's happening. You can see it. It's
Uh,
miss, go on. we'll see evidence of what might have been something breaking off the piece of the missile. And then if
Mm.
we try to focus on that, it's possible that the second Patriot fused on that piece of debris, but it missed the actual warhead. And then we see the warhead go onto the ground. So this is exactly the same behavior that we see 1991, so 33 years apart. And a question that one might ask is, how can this be? Why did both engagements behave essentially the same way? They both essentially failed the same way. And I think the answer is uh, rather simple. Um, when a missile is coming in, it has a pointy nose. The missile has a pointy nose. And the radar reflection from the missile is very small. You can think of the missile as a mirror surface. And if the mirror is a pointy surface looking at you, and you
Mm-hmm.
shine a flashlight at it, a very, very small amount of the light gets reflected back to you, which is what the radar is doing. The radar shines this radio signal at the missile, and what it actually gets back is a very small reflection. The reflection is so small that it has great difficulty tracking the incoming warhead. So what then happens is the interceptor is launched,
Mm-hmm.
and the interceptor, in this case the Patriot, it has what's called a fuse on it. In this particular case, the fuse is another radar that is looking to see if it can sense the presence of a target object near it as it flies by. And the radar reflection is so weak and the accuracy of placement of the missile is so low that the missile almost never gets close enough for the radar from the interceptor to sense that the target is there.
Mm.
And so it just flies by. And once it flies by, the ground radar is tracking both the interceptor and the warhead, and it says, "Gee whiz, the warhead has been missed." And so I want to destroy the interceptor so it doesn't fall to the ground as a large piece of debris,
Right.
reduce ground damage from it. And so what you see is the salvage fusing of the Patriot interceptor after it is missed. And we see this 30 years apart. Now, what's very interesting about this potential intercept, we don't know a lot about the details of the interceptors in both cases, but the interceptor in Tel Aviv more recently was probably a Patriot PAC-3 interceptor. There are two interceptors, the PAC-2 and the PAC-3. We don't know that. I can only guess. I don't have that information. But if it's a PAC-3, the PAC-3 was modernized at enormous expense and effort relative to the
Correct.
PAC-2. It has a forward-looking radar right in its nose, so that it doesn't have the PAC-2 had a side-looking radar fuse. So the PAC-3 is significantly more advanced as a design than the PAC-2 for intercepting this kind of fast-moving target. It also has a ring of rocket motors around the nose part of the PAC-3. And those rocket motors are designed to create very strong instantaneous impulses to rotate the body of the PAC-3 so it can do lateral accelerations quickly. The PAC-2 only uses fins, and because it uses fins, it takes a longer time, there's a longer delay time trying to rotate to do a lateral acceleration. So if these were PAC-3 interceptors, it really shows that the advances in the interceptor did not help at all. We can't be sure of that, but it
Mm-hmm.
also, the PAC-3 interceptor cost about $4 or $5 million each,
Right.
whereas the PAC-2 cost about $1 million each. So this is not a good situation given what we saw in this particular engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I find that I will bring back a story from many years ago when India was considering the S-400, um, and I was following this topic very closely, and I found that the PAC-3 and the S-400 were offered, and India, I think after testing it, decided to go for the S-400. How do you think they compare to the S-400? Because I know they've been able to shoot some down. I think some 16 launchers have been destroyed in Ukraine. Um, but of course, the Russians have huge numbers of those. So
Well,
how does that compare to, let's say, a
uh,
Patriot today?
keep in mind that the Patriot is very capable against airplanes.
Correct. Yes.
If it fires against an airplane, the best strategy for the pilot is to get out of the plane.
Yeah.
You can't evade the interceptors well enough to lose your life being hit. So the reason a plane is so much easier for the interceptor to destroy is a plane is a large object. It's flying in the air. It's flying slowly.
Right.
Even it's flying at the speed of sound, Mach 1, which is usually not the case because they're usually flying at a high Mach high speed relative to Mach 1, but not much fast, not supersonically during combat.
Correct.
And so the plane is traveling maybe 250 to 300 meters per second. Let's say it's traveling at near the speed of sound. The interceptor itself is traveling at about 1.5 kilometers per second. So it
Right.
has a very substantial speed advantage over the airplane. In the case of a ballistic missile now, not a missile like the ATACMS, which is really not ballistic. I'll explain that shortly. In the case of a ballistic missile fired from a range of 600 kilometers, the speed is over 2 kilometers per second.
Right.
So you're actually traveling faster than the interceptor itself. Now, the rocket has a warhead at the nose. And if the interceptor flies by the warhead and detonates and hits the back end of the rocket, the warhead will just continue onto the ground, governed by aerodynamics and gravity.
Right.
So you really have to hit the warhead and detonate the warhead to have a successful intercept. And that
Right.
means you must hit at the front end. And it's very hard to find the front end because it's got a pointy tip and the radar doesn't reflect off it. So it's extremely difficult problem. In the case of the airplane, if I miss the front end of the airplane and I detonate, I'm going to do severe damage to the aircraft wings, fuselage, other pieces of the airplane, and the airplane will fail. It will fall, it will
Right.
disintegrate. So hitting an airplane is a tremendously less challenging target
Right.
than hitting a ballistic missile target. So the Patriot is essentially useless against ballistic missiles. It really The intelligent way to use it is not even to try to fire at a ballistic missile. In the case of the engagement we saw in Tel Aviv, the Houthi missile was traveling at about 3 kilometers per second because it flew from 1,000 kilometers range. In
Right.
the second engagement that we saw from 1991, the missile was traveling at 2 kilometers per second because it was traveling only 600 kilometers range from Iraq into Israel. So Iraq into Syria in this case. I'm sorry, but the target was a much easier target to hit, but it still was too difficult to deal with. And
Mm.
so the air defenses are very capable against aircraft. And of course, aircraft are a major threat. Now, the problem that you run into, that Ukraine has run into with its air defenses, particularly with Patriot, is that the introduction of drones have created a real problem for current air defenses because the drones, if you're using big enough drones, the drones are all kinds of sizes, but if you're using like these geranium drones that are very similar to the Turkish drones, the
Bayraktars.
yeah, they sort of
Yes.
little airplanes. They're
Yes.
rather easy targets to shoot down, but you can't ignore them because they carry maybe 100 pounds of warhead, 50 kilograms of warhead, and
Right.
and and they're accurate. They have guidance, so you can't ignore them if you're a Patriot defense unit because they'll run into one of your launchers and destroy your interceptors, or they'll attack your radar. So you have to intercept them. So you have these extremely numerous and inexpensive targets that you have no choice but to expend an expensive interceptor on. And you don't have that
Yeah.
many interceptors. So what the Russians have done is they had a very well thought out campaign where they were flying um, uh, the flying drones at the Patriot units, exhausting their supply of interceptors. This campaign was going on probably in earnest, maybe January to February or so of 2023, I'd say, no,
Correct.
2024, 2024. And there were lots of reports of intercepts of these drones, and it was misunderstood by the press and the public what was actually going on. What was actually going on was the campaign to exhaust the interceptor capabilities of the Patriots, so that there would be no interceptors left to engage
Right.
aircraft, and that's what the Russians did.
I mean, this seems to be a strategy that, when I look at a lot of Western analysts, they certainly, a lot of them. I'm not saying you at all.
That's all
I've seen
right.
your work. You're a
I'm a
lot more
critic of the
neutral, a
Western
lot more.
technology these
But
days.
but there's a lot of Western analysts who are always downplaying, or often in a very childish manner, underestimating the Russian capability. And I find that guys, for the last 3 years, they've been really dishing out weapon strikes, missile strikes, air defense, artillery in such a large scale. I find it laughable when I mean, people still run articles that say Russia is running out of weapons. I mean, 3 years into the war, I
Ridiculous.
find it's. What's your thought on that? I mean, it
Well,
seems to me that.
there's a
Go ahead.
combination of things that are happening, that have been happening and are continuing to happen. First of all, the Russians have shown a remarkable level of innovation on the battlefield. when they do something that doesn't succeed, they very quickly analyze what they have done wrong and make corrections to their strategy. And they have shown a very, very impressive responsiveness with regard to their combat activities. So in the case of the drones, they have, for example, both sides have been using drones to great effect. I mean, it transformed a, a great deal of the combat environment in the Ukraine war here.
Right.
However, the Russians have taken the drones, their drone activities to a different level than the Ukrainians. First of all, the Russians have used their full industrial base to manufacture drones at a very high rate. The Ukrainians do not have the industrial base to manufacture drones at nearly the rate that the Russians have been able to produce these drones at. Now, making matters more complicated, the Russians have introduced all kinds of jamming capabilities against the Ukrainian drones. A drone is basically a pilotless aircraft where you have a communication link to someone on the ground who sees what is in front of the drone with a camera. And the camera has to send a signal back to the operator, and the operator has to send signals back to the drone. Now, if the drone is in a jamming environment that's so severe that it cannot receive signals from the pilot that's far away, the drone becomes useless. It just flies, without purpose.
Correct.
And the Russians have been extremely effective in jamming Ukrainian drones. So the drones have been rendered tremendously less effective than their counterparts that the Russians are using. The Russians have even introduced drones that have fiber optic cables. The
Correct.
drones can this is a technique that's used in torpedoes. I mean,
Yes,
torpedoes
wire
have
guys.
fiber optic cables, and fiber optic cables can be thin as a hair and
Correct.
very strong and reeled out for miles uh, as the drone flies. And of course, now a drone that is capable of that kind of function, that has that function, is simply impervious to jamming. So
Yes.
so they have taken they have really uh, created a disaster for the Ukrainian army with their use of drones.
That's
Then
true.
the Russians have designed a very effective series of drones. For example, these geranium drones can act as high flying uh, search and targeting uh, drones. They don't carry the weapons. They have other drones that are specifically carrying an explosive charge. These are these Lancet drones,
Correct.
and they travel relatively fast, not very fast, but they have a significant warhead on them, shaped charge warhead, and and you can have a single drone flying high, um, directing multiple Lancet drones against multiple targets because it's not carrying a big payload. And it's
Correct.
far enough in altitude and high enough that the people on the ground really cannot see it. And unless you have an advanced air defense working with you, which is very expensive and you put at risk if it's too close to the combat area, you basically are left with eyes and ears. And these drones are basically, you know, largely non-detectable by the combat troops on the ground. So they have really, the Russians have really extremely effectively brought together a multitude of technologies in an extremely clever and effective way to make their drones extremely effective while nullifying to a great extent Ukrainian drones. So that's one piece of the situation. Then,
That's incredible. Yeah.
then you have a problem with things like artillery. The Russians have been able to produce artillery shells at easily 10 times the rate that their Western counterparts can produce, the Western counterparts being Europe and the United States. So artillery is one of the big killers in warfare. So you have
Right.
drones now. The drones can, in effect, um, uh, tell you to a first approximation where the enemy's strong points are for sure. It's harder to find troop concentrations because the troops, if they're smart and it's available, will try to hide in forested areas when that's available. But if they're moving, they have to expose themselves. And armored vehicles are straightforward to acquire with drones. And this then gives the artillery targets to shoot at. And the enormous amount of artillery firepower that can be precision directed against forces, Ukrainian forces, before they are in engagement range of Russian forces, has very effectively reduced the casualties that the Russians have taken in combat. There's this mythology that the Russians are somehow losing fantastic numbers of soldiers. Well, they're certainly losing soldiers, but nothing close to what's happening to the Ukrainians. And the
Yes.
Western
It's
press, the Western press takes these outright outrageous false statements made by the Ukrainians and simply publishes these statements without any thought. I mean, they
it's
just,
incredible.
it's you wonder where, you know, where are the journalists who are experts in combat on the battlefield? Where are they?
Correct.
What are they doing if they're not accurately reporting the situation on the ground? So so that's been a real problem. And then the West, have a tremendously profound problem that, to my knowledge, has not been talked about, at least at this time. And that is we have a privatized military industrial complex. And when you think about it, when you go to, let me give you an example. We had these switchblade drones that we were
Right.
using initially, and we were bragging about them. One of those switchblade drones, they're launched from canisters. The canister and the drone cost $58,000. A drone that can do the same job as the switchblade that's derived from commercial technology can cost 700 or $800.
Yeah.
So you're paying 50 or 60 times more for a single drone that can do no better than a commercially built drone, which the Russians are building themselves rather than having a big profit margin being given to a defense contractor. And who can afford that? Even the West, with its tremendous wealth, cannot afford to pay this much for weapon systems. And the Russians, and incidentally the Chinese too, have government defense industries. And those government defense industries can manufacture significant high technology weapons at fractions of the amount of money that the West pays. So, for example, if you want to build a guided missile frigate in the United States, you'll pay about $1.6 billion. If
Oh,
you manufacture the same frigate in South Korea, which is also a privatized country, you pay 0.6 billion, almost one third the price. I don't know what the cost in China is, but I'll bet you it's half of that.
correct.
I don't know, but probably 300 million, 400 million. Now, if you can build 4 ships with the same level of technological capability relative to what the Western countries can build, or United States, then you've got a problem in a significant naval war engagement, because the
Correct.
United, so I mean, I'm very concerned about what I hear in the United States, because there's a lot of discussion about going to war with China.
No,
And you,
that's not a
you,
good idea.
yeah, well, you look at the Russians have handily beat NATO. The war is over. Anyone who's saying in Belgium, who's saying, well, what we need to do this to win the war, is simply out of contact with reality. The war is
That's
already
true.
lost. There's no
Fortunately, yes.
a simple a simple factual review of the battlefield environment would tell you that the war has been lost. And you wonder how these people can come up with these arguments. If it's not delusion, they're just lying. And what's
It's
so
true.
disturbing is that they're lying to themselves, or they're so out of touch with reality that they can't make a competent decision, which of course is making the situation even worse, because there's a freight train coming at the West right now. That's the Russians in Ukraine. And the Russians are going to be left no alternative but to go to east, west of the Dnieper River, if we don't start negotiating with them now. Because it's clear that the Russians, all this stuff about the Russians want to invade Europe, that's nonsense. No evidence for that at all. But what is clear is the Russians have largely met their goal militarily of taking eastern Ukraine, and that they do not want to have to escalate to taking large parts of western Ukraine, because that's a problem for them. They have to
Correct.
occupy places where they are not necessarily welcome. And they understand that, and they basically simply want Ukraine, the core of what is Western Ukraine, which is a different culture from other parts of the Ukraine. They simply want Ukraine to not join NATO and be neutral. And anyone who says, well, we'll negotiate something so that they can join NATO 10 years from now, is simply not listening to the reality of what the Russians are saying. It's just that simple. Anyway, so the situation is quite serious and quite catastrophic
It
in
is.
its consequences. Very dangerous situation.
And so, as you just said, the Russians moving or attacking NATO is highly unlikely unless, of course, they are provoked. And this is where things get quite dicey because, at least under the Biden administration, we didn't really have too much of um, thinking about what we were doing. We were just about, okay, let's keep sending weapons. We're bleeding them in Ukraine. They seem to be happy about it. And every time I hear somebody like our Senator, Mr. Lindsey Graham, it's tragic on so many levels, and I wonder why
It's
is it that
sickening.
the West? It's really
It is
sickening.
sickening. It's sickening. I mean, I I feel so much sympathy for the Ukrainian people, and also the Russians. I find myself in a strange situation. I feel sympathy for both the Russians and the Ukrainian people, not the government.
Correct.
The government is a bunch of criminals who are murdering their own people. When
Correct.
they conscript a 25-year-old against his will, they grab him off the street and they give him a few weeks of training, which is
Yeah.
completely inadequate. They're sending that person to be murdered on the battlefield. It's
Yes.
amazing to me how the Ukrainian army has not yet collapsed. I was actually expecting it to collapse months ago. But of
Hmm.
course, when you're fighting to defend your country and you're a soldier, people have shown extraordinary bravery and resilience. But they are being taken advantage of by their political leadership because their political leadership is throwing bodies at the Russians. And the Russians, the Russians, I mean, information I've gotten from time to time through intermediaries indicate to me that the Russian officers, many of them, are sickened by the situation. They don't want to kill these people, but they have no choice. They try to get them surrender in many cases. They won't surrender, so they have to go in and kill them. But they really would rather get them to surrender. And
It's true.
the losses are extraordinary. And now I predict that they're going to start conscripting 18-year-olds, people essentially before they even go to college. And that's Zelensky has been resisting that, but this is coming up in the Rada now, and it's being discussed in the Rada. And these extremist political leadership, these ultra nationalists, are like Hitler while Berlin was falling. You know, Hitler was happy to take teenage children and shove them in front of the Russian army to be murdered. What as they were coming into Berlin. Berlin was undefendable at that point. And this is exactly what we're seeing now, history repeating itself. And these ultra
So sad.
nationalists, they refer to the Russians as Untermenschen. I mean, it's hard to believe their language they use. It's as horrifying as the language the Israelis use when they refer to the Palestinians. It's just horrifying. And
Yeah.
uh, I'm beside myself with what I'm seeing here. I'm so deeply appalled by what I've been seeing. I just can't express myself on this matter enough.
Yes, it's been sickening, especially. I mean, a little more context. I came to Belgium 24 years ago, so I'm an Indian. Uh, so married here with two kids, but I have seen over the years, every time, I didn't think much of it when they first went to Afghanistan and then Iraq. I was all, I think I was too much into the mainstream media, and I said, okay,
Yeah,
it's Saddam. He's maybe the bad guy. Maybe they need the freedom. Maybe they need, they do have weapons of mass destruction. And then, the deeper you go into that rabbit hole, and then you see it was all basically a con job, one after the other, to just
and the
expense
press
trillions of dollars of wealth
and the
from.
press
um,
is derelict in its duty to the people.
Absolutely,
The New York
absolutely.
Times has become simply a rag. It was never, well, it was an excellent newspaper at one time.
There
It, it,
was a
it,
time.
it had its failures. It had its failures like any organization does. But this paper has just become a rag. Anybody who whispers in the ear of one of these journalists who's looking for a story that spreads a false belief by the Biden administration gets front page play in
Yeah,
in in the newspaper, and the
it's
people
it's tragic.
responsible are the editors.
It's tragic. It's and I find that really tragic because as a person, I always, we grew up with American culture, American music, American, influenced by American cinema. So we always had a view on America, and over the last, at least just before, let's say George W. Bush, the junior, and then Obama, yeah, things were really, especially the out because we didn't care too much about local politics, American politics. We knew there were a lot of race relation issues. There were a lot of Black Lives Matter, local crime, all that getting worse over time. And but then this wars, the wars just going on. And we saw that so much wealth was taken away from America. I find that really tragic, especially when you go to cities like LA or New York, you have so much homelessness. And I find that really, what were they thinking? Is because you've done irreparable damage to your own communities while you were focused on all these external wars, and just what do you think is going to happen over the next few years? Because
I don't know. I'm very concerned about the domestic environment in the United States. Of course, I live here and I'm an American citizen.
correct,
And if you would have asked me 10 years ago, well, I still like what I liked about America. I would say, well, we have terrible race problems, but we're trying to deal with it. So
correct,
it's not like Modi going after all these poor Muslims in India, which
correct.
I think is reprehensible. But but it's and I still think that many Americans are trying to struggle with these uh, serious problems that we have inherited partly through our history and partly through the economic system we have in the United States. But I think we are in a very dangerous and and degrading situation right now. Incidentally, I think Europe is too, in a
Yes, I
different,
agree.
yeah.
Yes,
And the corporations in the United States are in control of our government. We have any member of Congress, with only very small number of exceptions, um, cannot do anything without uh, listening to their financial support, which is driven by special interests, which are corporations and very large, very wealthy individuals. And this is an unstable situation because wealthy individuals, most wealthy individuals, do not appear to honor the idea of a social contract. To me, I mean, this is a simple-minded example. I acknowledge that from the beginning. But if you look at George H.W. Bush, he came from a very privileged environment, very wealthy family.
right.
He was the youngest combat pilot in the U.S. Navy during World War II. This guy weaseled his way into the Navy as a pilot, so he could fly in the war uh, in support of his country. And he was shot down by flying into a valley where he had gunfire to his left and right while he went up that valley trying to engage a target that he believed he had to hit. And his plane got hit and he went over the water and lucked out and he was picked up. But this was a man who showed great courage in in when his country was at war. His son evaded, uh, used his privilege to evade going into the military. Now, in fairness, in fairness, the Sun was not facing a war where evil was the target of was the enemy. I mean, what we were seeing in Japan and Nazi Germany was evil on an enormous scale. Whereas later on, why are we going to fight in Vietnam against people who really just want to be left alone? When you look at
Correct.
the wars we have fought since, they really have had no purpose. And and of course, tremendous amounts of tremendous numbers of people have died. Only a few Americans, although the numbers are very high and very troubling. But the number of other combatants we have killed, like in Vietnam and the Middle East, it's shocking. And
Correct.
I think it's coming back at us. Uh, the rise of BRICS now is the rhetoric is not talking about American brutality, at least among the BRICS, but it's really in the background. The
Correct.
American bullying, the abuse of the American dollar by through sanctions, and the rise of a of an industrial call it third world. It's not a third world in the sense it was 10 or 20 years ago. Now it's a modernizing
Correct.
world,
Correct.
and United States is going to be only one big player. China, of course, is going to be the biggest player, but Russia is going to be a continually growing giant player. And the rest of the world, developing world, is growing by leaps and bounds, in part because of China and Russia's much less opportunistic attitudes towards the developing world. I mean, they want to sell things, they want to make profits, but they're not as determined to strip these countries of everything that they have, like what American capitalism has been doing. And
Mm.
there's going to be a price to pay for the United States. And we're seeing it
Mm.
now. And political leaders in the United States have been living in a vacuum. And I I was in the Pentagon for some years. I was a science and policy advisor to the chief of naval operations, and I I'm reasonably well educated. I don't, and broadly educated, in spite of the fact I went to MIT. I actually uh, know a significant amount about social and political issues because I've always been interested in them along with science. And when I would read intelligence documents, my reaction was, there's nothing in here. This is indoctrination. This is not an intelligence report that tells me something that helps me understand how to plan for the military activities that I'm involved in planning for. I mean, it's all this stuff about the Russians will do this and the Russians. I mean, like, they're not afraid of nuclear weapons. They're going to come rushing across the border and we're going to hit them with nuclear weapons and they're going to just continue coming. And you say to yourself, this is silly. I mean,
Who wrote
human
this?
beings, they're not cockroaches, they're human beings.
Correct.
And you'd see this and looking at political people in political leadership positions, and I'm in a position where I interact with them occasionally. I won't say regularly, but occasionally at a level where I know what they're talking about. I can talk with them. It's clear to me they have no idea about the real world. They read these intelligence reports, which are worse than the New York Times. I mean, if that's
Okay, that's
possible.
saying a lot.
And they think they know something because it's stamped secret or top secret. Now, certainly,
Mm,
I worked with documents that made my hair stand on end because they were sensitive, and always treated them all that way, even though many of them were nonsense. But the great majority of documents that I saw when I was dealing with the highest levels of classified information were either misleading or doctrinal or simply wrong or naive beyond belief. And you couldn't get anything out of these documents where there were judgments involved, and somebody was talking to you who supposedly was an expert on, let's say, Russia or China or India. You knew what they were saying was nonsense, because I knew Russians, I knew Chinese people, and you know, uh, and and but the people in these higher level jobs think they know things that they think the average citizen doesn't know, and in fact, they know less than the average astute individual who reads the paper with a critical eye and uses good judgment and a good education to to make a guess about what the situations really are. It's
mm.
it's very worrisome, and we're seeing that in Europe as well as in the United States. The European leadership, I, I well, I'm so
There is a
upset
loss
with
of
Biden,
words.
I can't begin to talk about it because he's been so reckless. But if I were
Absolutely.
German, I mean, I have an adopted daughter in Germany. I'm in Germany at least twice a year visiting her and her son. And I love Germany. It's a great country to visit. Uh,
Hmm.
I come from a Jewish background. My wife is a Catholic.
Mine too.
and
So yes.
and 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 I find the Germans unbelievably skilled and well educated and civilized, and uh, and to see what Olaf Scholz is doing to Germany now, I'm worried about the future for my daughter because
Yes.
Germany is rapidly descending into a second tier industrial state. And I don't know how it's going to stop that descent. I can tell
Yes.
you how it should.
Hmm.
It needs to negotiate a peace with Russia, as Western Europe needs to negotiate a peace with Russia and start doing trade so
Again.
Western Europe can get access again to inexpensive energy,
True.
fuel, and gas. That is the key to Western Europe's prosperity. And the
Yes.
Americans took that away. The Americans destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, and Schultz knew about it and didn't
Correct.
say a word to Biden. He was there when Biden was saying these things, and he had to know. He had to have been told that Biden was going to destroy that pipeline.
It's really incredible. That was an amazing moment of ineptitude. It was absolutely, I could not believe my eyes. It's absolutely incredible that, yeah, they got away with it in the sense that, yeah, Germany did not say one word. And I see that it's you're either under the American influence fully, no, like we are in Western Europe, or you're not. And if you're not, you're treated quite, unfairly. Let's take the case of India, for example. I know they tried to pressure India to stop buying Russian oil,
Well,
regardless of the fact.
The Indians are not stupid. There are lots of criticisms you can make of the Indians, but
Yes,
never stupid.
true. And I said to myself, guys, we have 1.4 billion people. Of course, we're going to look out for our needs, and energy is a, yeah, we call it a primary need. So
Yeah,
they're not going to.
it's like oxygen. Yeah, I mean
Yes, we need it.
it's hard to believe this guy Blinken actually went to China and asked them to stop trading with Russia. I mean, you say to yourself, where does this guy think he is? What planet is he on? Did he expect it?
Exactly.
He goes to Russia, he goes to China now. They don't even send people out to meet with him. I mean, they just treat
It's
him
sad.
like he's almost a tourist.
Yes,
Fend for yourself when you arrive. I mean, Secretary of State of the United States. So the
yes,
Chinese have made their views of him very well known, very clear.
yes. It seems to me that we're at a point, and the hope is, let's say, if Mr. Trump can get something done with Mr. Putin and try to, because I find the only real solution is to dial back a bit NATO and Russia, both sides dial back, pull back some of our, really offensive weapons close to the borders, and then, you know, make it so that you don't have too many air defenses. Make it like a buffer zone, and draw down a bit, because it seems to me that we are now just Cold War 0.20, and everybody is going to spend billions and billions, especially now that in NATO they're trying to increase the contribution from 2% to 4%.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
yeah,
that's not going to happen. Let me tell you why. I mean,
okay,
the Western European economy is in a toilet bowl. They don't have
correct,
the money.
absolutely not,
They have to look after their populations at some level, and
correct,
you know, I, I I I can't imagine they'll have the money to do this.
no,
And Europe is, the best strategy for Europe at this point is to make peace.
correct,
And war has done extraordinary economic damage to Europe, extraordinary damage.
correct,
And it's hard for me to believe that leaders who are entrusted with the security of their country, could behave so recklessly as we have seen the British, the French, the German leadership behave.
correct.
And, as well as other centers of leadership in Europe. And
It's true.
they are simply not showing any concern about their own countries. And I don't understand why, because Russia is not, they are threatening Russia. And there's a simple way to look at Ukraine, the Ukrainian war. I'd just like to, since you may have Americans watching, and actually many Europeans who would remember the Cuban Missile Crisis or know about it.
Correct.
When the United States found out that the Russians were putting nuclear armed ballistic missiles in Cuba, we saw that as a primary threat to the security of the United States.
Correct.
Part of the reason for that was that these missiles were only 5 to 10 minutes away from delivering. Are you there? Oh yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm here. I'm just sharing my
These
screen.
missiles were only 5 to 10 minutes away from delivering nuclear weapons to places like Washington D.C. and New York and Boston and Florida, and so
Correct.
so it was thought to be intolerable by American political leadership that this kind of short nuclear timeline should be allowed with regard to with regard to the
Nuclear. Yes.
nuclear strikes. Now, what we what most American, in fact, I have not spoken to an American who had a different view on this. I'm sure there are such people, but every American I have asked, would you have supported an invasion of Cuba if the Russians had not backed down? Every American I have talked to said they would have supported an invasion of Cuba.
Correct.
In other words, every American. I mean, again, there are people I'm certain would, and there are arguments for not doing that, but because of the dangers. But I would have myself, I would have certainly supported an invasion, and we were preparing to invade Cuba if we couldn't get a negotiated arrangement with Khrushchev. So if Khrushchev had told us, it's not your business, Cubans agreed to this and we want to do it, and tough luck, Americans, we would
Hmm.
have addressed the situation by invading. Now,
Correct.
look at Ukraine. The United States has told the Russians, Anthony Blinken himself told Lavrov that the United States, in 2 months before the Russians actually walked into Ukraine, the United States uh, uh, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken told the foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, that we, the United States, reserve the right to put nuclear armed ballistic missiles in Ukraine. Now, what was this guy Blinken thinking? What did he think the Russians would do given that prospect?
Hmm.
And of course, um, the Russians invaded because they
Oh,
were
yeah.
not going to allow this to occur. So
Mm.
they were not going to allow the Ukrainians to attack all Ukrainian citizens of Russian ethnic background, and they were certainly not going to allow Ukraine to become a base for NATO nuclear weapons pointed at Russia. And I don't know what Putin could have done differently. I have friends who disagree with me, but I have tried, not with hostility, with honest and earnest discussion, to get these friends to explain to me what they would have done facing the same circumstance. And none of them can explain what they would have done other than to invade. They cannot tell me of an alternative action other than invading to put a stop to the emplacement of this threat.
Mm.
So, I mean, I say this not with malice because these are friends of mine. I don't make judgments against them. I'm
Of
not
course
in
not.
the business of hating people who voted for someone I didn't agree, I didn't vote for. I'm against all that. Uh, and but I don't know what else Putin could have done. I
Yes.
mean, if I were Putin, in fact, if people think that they wanted to depose Putin to get him taken from the leadership role, they might have been able to do it if he were unwilling to take the action he took.
Correct.
It's not clear to me that his National Security Council would not have revolted and said, you're not a leader who's looking after the primary security interests of this country if you don't
Correct.
stop this thing from happening. I think that could have actually brought Putin down if he actually wasn't willing to go in. I don't know that's true, but I think that's more likely what would have brought him down than going in like these guys fantasize about that somehow
I
he
think
you know
it's true because, well, if you look at Putin, he's the first leader. He seems to, just pop out the deep state of Russian deep state, which used to be communist, and suddenly it's democracy. And so he pops out from the bureaucracy, deep from within it. So he's like the first child of a brand new Russia. They don't know yet how to become a full-scale democracy. They're on the path towards it, and he's, let's say, the stopgap. And the way I see it, he seems to have been quite measured in the way he prosecutes this war, in the sense that he's not just going willy-nilly, I will drop huge amounts of ordnance on you wherever I can, because that can be done too in a total war kind of situation. But he seems to be focused, even sometimes to his own detriment of his troops, to take the hard way on the battlefield, keeping it mostly local in the south and the east of Ukraine. Do you agree on that?
Well, I think historians are going to have a party analyzing the Western demonization of Putin. Now,
Mm-hmm.
to be clear, I would not want to be a political adversary of Putin's.
Of course.
He'd kill you.
No.
All right.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to paint Putin as, Mr. Nice Guy.
No, of course.
But if you look at the strategic decisions he has made aimed at increasing the power and capabilities and level of civil life in Russia, he has done really remarkable things. I mean, when he took power, nobody was paying taxes in Russia. The country was in trouble. He put a system of taxation in place. It was like, I think, 12 or 13%. Everybody was paying. It wasn't a graduated income tax, but it was there, and it was enforced. So it wasn't, like it was under Yeltsin, where the government was not able to collect taxes. Only last year, I think, it's not even a year ago, he turned that tax system into a graduated income tax. Now, if you make more money, if you're an oligarch, I think you pay up to 20 or 25%. The people in the lower incomes pay, I think, less than 12 or 13%. So it's a more graduated income tax for taking the pressure off the less well-to-do members of the society. But he's getting the income he needs from taxes to run the government. And of course, he's done, they have very large revenues from the oil and gas industry, which he took away from the oligarchs. He said, that oil and gas is a national asset. It's not for you. It's for the people and government of Russia. And he turned it into a national asset. And a very large part of the government revenue comes from, the international sales of gas and oil. And a perfectly sensible thing to have done. With regard, he's promoted independent entrepreneurial exercises. For example, if you invest in Russian industry, and you make money and you make good profits, you're required by Russian law to use that money you made for further investments. You cannot take it out of Russia and put it into Swiss banks. So he's cut back on the hemorrhaging of Russian wealth to foreign countries. So how can you say this man is a demon with regard to Russia? Now, is he tough? No question. No question. Is he murderous? Well, if you're a political adversary, yes. Is he tolerant? He actually is pretty tolerant. I mean, people get up. The old joke is people fall out of windows, but and that happens.
Correct.
If you make a big enough nuisance of yourself, you will. You run the risk of being murdered. No question about it, and that's a terrible situation. However, the great majority of people can express their view. This is not Stalinist Russia. This
No,
is not Russia where you have a private conversation and you're critical of Putin's policies, and you find the KGB knocking down your door the next day. It doesn't. It's not happening at a significant level in Russia. It's happening at a significant level in Ukraine, for example. If
correct.
you're in Ukraine, you can have a private discussion and get arrested and sent to jail for it because you're raising questions about this neo-Nazi government. There's lots
Correct.
there's lots of evidence for this, reporting on this, except the New York Times still wants to make believe that we're talking about a free and open country and that we're fighting for freedom there. That's just a slogan that's being used to support a dictatorship that's murdering its own people. That's what's going on now.
Yes. And what do you think happens now that we have hopefully Donald Trump coming in on the 20th of January? He's quite polarizing. Some like him, some love him, some hate him. What do you think? Will he be able to bring a bit of peace? He be able to end the war where both sides are a bit, okay, not super happy, but they can live with it, they can compromise, because in the end, that's how this is going to end. I really hope we do not escalate beyond Ukraine.
Well,
What do you think is the hope here?
well, I'm very cautious about what to expect from Trump. I believe that he genuinely wants to stop this war. I'm not quite sure why he wants to do it, but I think he actually does want to do it, and I think he's genuine in that objective. My concern is that he's very erratic.
Correct.
He's very, he's very impulsive. And if he doesn't get what he wants, if he doesn't understand what to expect from the Russians, and if he doesn't negotiate something that's acceptable to the Russians, I'm concerned he might impulsively react in a negative way that could bring the war back up to the forefront of intensity. And I hope that doesn't occur. I think that he will have to accept that NATO is not going to be part of Ukraine. There's no negotiating that point with the Russians. They have spilt enough blood and spent
purpose.
enough national treasure to put that into the background, and they are not going to give that up. This is not something. The I mean, one of the I think it was the great grandson of Peter the Great, who was murdered when Catherine the Great came into power. He actually they
Yes.
had a war in Russia with Prussia, and they defeated the Prussians. And he decided that because he liked the Prussians, he was going to give up all the land that the Russians won in their battles against Prussia. And it's probable that he was murdered by the members of the army who were so angry. Eventually, because people died for that war, and whether it was right or not, or just or not, if you're a soldier and you've seen your friends die and you've been injured yourself, or you've suffered the immense sacrifices of being in a combat situation, and someone just gives it away for nothing. If they give it away for peace, there's some kind of lasting benefit, but this guy just gave it away, and I think probably he was murdered by officers in his own army, probably. And I don't think you could give this away. If you were Putin and you tried to give this away, you'd be deposed.
No.
They're talking about deposing Putin because everyone's going to rise up against him because he has this war. Everyone's going
Mhm.
to rise up against him if he doesn't follow through. I mean, it's the
True.
most
He has to.
delusionary
Yes.
perspective
I
on the
think.
Russian situation that you can imagine. So,
Correct.
so there is going to be no NATO in Ukraine, no question. The only question is, what are the circumstances that are going to cause there to be no NATO? Is there going to be a complete control of the Black Sea coast, including Nikolaev and Odessa, when the Russians feel forced to take it over, take those areas over, and then strangle Ukraine since they need to export grain through the Black Sea ports, and you know, rather than occupy, I don't think there's any scenario that I can see where they will try to occupy Ukraine, because Ukraine is
It's
a
just too big.
is a racist state. Not all Ukrainians, obviously, but it's a racist state, and it's got this terrible history of anti-Russian behavior. Russians have not been so good either over history. But if you insist upon using history as your basis for hating people, you will literally be at war with everybody in the world.
Correct.
I mean, it's just, you cannot use history as the basis for hating people or not accepting people,
Correct.
and any more than race or religion. And in Ukraine, there's a lot of people who appear to be very deeply angry about the unfortunate history of repression from Russia over hundreds of years. That's not necessarily Russia today. Rather, same in Israel. Of course, it's the same thing. You see some blonde, blue-eyed guy talking about how 5,000 years ago his ancestors were in Israel. What? Don't you know about genetics? It's such a joke. It's hard to believe.
Yeah.
And if you have these arguments, if you use these arguments to claim rights and determine who your adversaries are, you will be at war with everyone, and you will be constantly involved in one or another kind of war or genocide. And we have to get out of this. We have to move past this. And
Correct.
I'm afraid the Ukrainians seem to have this deeply embedded in their culture. And
Yes.
unless they can get rid of it,
Yes.
it's So when
I
they
think I pray every day. I'm a Christian, so I pray every day, and I pray for these people. I certainly pray most of all when the war ends is for forgiveness, because I think without that they will never be able to move forward. And I think I really pray that they stop. They finally and I hope for Russia's sake they get to keep whatever they took so far, and for Ukraine's sake, yeah, they get
well,
to stay neutral.
who's
Maybe
going to
they can
take it
join
away
the
from them
EU.
at this point?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that they're going to give up everything they fought for,
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
You win a
Absolutely.
war and you're supposed to surrender after you won the war.
No,
I mean, this is the most bizarre perspective. It's hard to believe that people can claim any intellect at all and
it's
make these
true.
arguments. You'd think they would be embarrassed. You know,
They don't.
it's
It's true. It's it's really a tragic situation indeed. And going into the negotiation, I can see, yes, this is by far, I think, the toughest negotiation Mr. Trump might have ever faced. This might just be the one that takes the cake. We don't know how it will
well,
go. I'm really curious. Yes.
he can what he can do. Politics all these, I see these people all the time, all these wise people who explain to me why I'm naive, you're
Correct.
naive, you don't understand this, Look, you're coming in, you're the new president. You didn't start this war. The
No.
last administration started the war. What I would do if I were Trump, I'd declassify what Biden did with the Nord Stream pipeline. I'd
Oh.
make the Europe.
Oh.
I'd tell the Europeans everything. There's no national security aspect to the Americans destroying the Nord Stream pipeline. We did it, no question about it, none at all. I declassify that. Let let them let the American people know. Let the Europeans know what the Americans did to Europe's economic future. I'd declassify that. What I'd also do is I'd say, this is not my war. NATO has no business expanding in this area. Um, uh, I didn't start this war. I want to end it. Uh, there's no NATO for Ukraine. They can stamp their feet as long as they want. Uh, the administration is trying to blame me. What he's got to deal with is that the administration, the current administration, the Democrats, are going to try to blame him for losing the war.
Correct.
And all he needs to do, I mean, I'm a Democrat. I'll stand up and say that's a lie. I'm a Democrat.
Hmm.
I think the Democrats are outrageous in what they've done. And
Correct.
I'm speaking as a Democrat. I'll get up there and say that's a lie.
Correct.
Trump did not start this war. He's ending it.
Correct.
And I'd give him high marks for doing that. So I think he should use the political, the population of serious, honest intellectuals to support him in his claim that he didn't lose the war. The war has been lost. The war was lost a year ago or more than a year ago.
Correct.
And
Correct.
and anybody who wants to claim that Trump has lost the war by not sending a few $billion of materials when when Ukraine has run out of people to man their army.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
It's
So
absurd
what
indeed.
he should just do, and he's been good at that in the past. I don't always think for the best purpose, to be honest, but he's been good at just basically laughing in the face of political leaders. And part of the reason he's so popular is so many Americans are fed up with the government we now have.
Correct.
I talked to a lot of people who voted for Trump. Yeah, in fact, I'm a Democrat, so often in social environments where a lot of Democrats are, and they say, "You talk to these people, these deplorable." I say, "Yes, I do, because they're not deplorable. They're angry. They're angry. They feel they've been screwed over. They feel their government is not doing anything for them. I disagree with what they're doing in response, but I am completely sympathetic with their anger. I'm completely
Correct.
sympathetic. They have gotten rolled over, and the Democrats did it when the 2009 collapse occurred. Rather than Obama sending all these crooks in Wall Street to jail for fraud, because there were massive fraud against people who were misled into taking mortgages they had no hope of paying back. He protected these people in Wall Street, and he allowed them to go after all these people who were unsophisticated investors who were misled by bankers and people selling them mortgages that they had no hope of paying. I met people under that. I saw people. I have friends in California. Um, they're I met a lot of their workers. These people that were farmers in California. They have very good. They're very nice and pleasant relationships with their workers in the fields. These particular people. I'm not talking in general. These friends of mine. So I've met a lot of their workers. wonderful people, honest, hardworking, and and I saw these people buying things that they couldn't come, and they were advised by these friends to not do it, but they were told by the bankers, it's fine, it's a good idea, you're going to become rich. And then of course they defaulted on everything and they lost everything. And
Mm,
this was done by Obama, the Democrats. The
yeah.
Democrats allowed these criminals in Wall Street, these bankers, to run roughshod over millions of people, tens of millions of people lost
Sad.
their life savings. And should someone be surprised they're angry? I'm not.
No, not at all.
I feel nothing but sympathy for these people. I don't think it's
Absolutely.
I don't agree with their solution, but the Democrats elected Trump. It's my view. They
It's
still
true.
haven't figured this out. They still haven't figured this out.
I know. It's amazing. They
Yeah,
still
I
break
find
that.
it amazing.
It really is. It's amazing that they can paint him for everything that he is for the last, I don't know, 10 years almost, ever since he came down the escalator. They call him everything under the sun, but they seem to forget the core, the basic necessities of their own citizenry, which is basically, please take care of us. Let's look for jobs, opportunities, the American dream. I mean, they
I
went
mean,
back on the basics.
For Hillary Clinton to call these people deplorables,
It's
I mean,
amazing.
I
I
find
mean,
it shocking.
it's
Frankly, if I, my reaction when she said that, because I come from a blue collar working class background. My father was a welder, and I grew up in a blue. I wound up very luckily a professor at MIT, but
right.
but I was
Yeah.
lucky. The people, a lot of the people I knew were dead in their late 30s and 40s because they got involved in crime and drugs and things like that. When I go back to my high school reunion, which I did, it was shocking to see how many people didn't make it, and you call these people deplorables? They were decent people. I grew up with them. I went to school with them. I
Or
played
just your
sports with them.
neighbors.
You know, they defended me when I was in trouble. They came to my
Mm.
defense. Unlike, incidentally, my academic colleagues who ran away when I got in trouble. So, uh, you know, uh, why are these people deplorable? I don't understand it. Some people are deplorable, but
Sure.
I have to include Democrats in that too now because
Yes.
these people who think they're so much
Absolutely.
better than everybody else, so superior.
Absolutely. I
So
mean, yeah, yeah, as humans, we are all capable of sinning and finding that low point and doing something absolutely horrid, of course. But when I see the amount of polarization and the amount of it's happening in Europe too, don't get me
yeah,
wrong.
well, believe me.
It's it's why do you vilify the other point of view? And most of us are really coming from, a center left or quite liberal way of thinking. I'm nearly 40 years old, so most of the things that were taboo, let's say a few years ago, be it gay rights or everything else, it's quite settled law, really. But they want to divide us. The narrative has always been that we are divided. There is a thing called race. There is a thing called, uh, you know, um, privilege, and it's amazing that
Of
they
course.
go after these tired old tropes when they don't focus that we're basically neighbors. We've been neighbors, and we just forgot to stop talking to each other. I mean, it's really sad. I find what has
Yeah, I
happened
mean,
to America.
y-
Yeah,
any person you meet, you try as best you can to be aware of their background
correct,
because they have had experiences that may or may not be difficult for them to deal with. But
correct.
that's true of everybody.
It's
I
true.
mean, you know, it always amazes me when I walk down the street and there are a bunch of guys digging ditches, and I walk by and I just say hello, how you doing? How the sense of concealed hostility evaporates because we have a real class problem in this country, in the United
Hmm.
States. Because people treat these people like they're dirt. They're not dirt. They're hardworking.
Correct.
Many of them are extraordinarily skilled at what they do. You
True.
know, and they're hardworking, and they earn their livings by doing what needs to be done, and sometimes for reasonable pay, and sometimes for inadequate pay. But
They do it still.
they have no choice, but they do it. You know,
Correct.
you see a car accident on the road, and all of a sudden people start stopping and running to help. Are these people deplorables? I mean, it's hard.
Yes.
It's one of the things when I see it, I say to myself, isn't this a remarkable statement about the cohesiveness, the good parts of cohesiveness in a society that you see just from the average person?
Correct.
And, why do you look down on these people? It's incredible to me.
That was a giant mistake. It backfired. It led to the first Trump
Well,
administration.
they don't
And
even
it's not like,
understand it. They don't even understand it.
no, they
They
don't.
think they just didn't spin it right for the election.
And they continue to double down on all their foolishness. It's absolutely insane. But it's been really wonderful. You've given me more time than I asked for, actually.
Okay.
So it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I
Well,
really appreciate it, Ted.